Hello, everyone. So we're just introducing the first of what are going to be our interview talks with people from now on. And it's very exciting. And I will hand over to Dad to say who we've got coming up after us right now.
Okay, well, the first talk is with Steve Hackett. And Steve and I had an idea for doing talks over dinner some years ago, and we recorded several, including several on the cruise ships. But this time, we got a call from Joe, an email, who suggested we do it, and it sounded like a brilliant idea. So Steve is...
Yeah, I was just going to say, before we let this get out of hand and you talk about everything except what we're supposed to right here, the point of this is, I'm sure most people who are going to be tuning in will know who Steve Hackett is, but for anyone who might not, could you tell us a little bit about Steve? Because what I think is absolutely lovely is all of these talks that you've done so far sort of cut straight into you guys having a chat, because you're all good friends. But no one tells anyone who they are. Would you tell us a little about Steve for anyone who might not know?
Yes, okay. Steve Hackett is one of the world's greatest guitarists. He was a guitarist for many years with Genesis, and he's now got his own band and been working independent of Genesis for many years. We first met in 1985 when they had the brilliant idea, Steve Hackett and Steve Howe, of performing together, and they set up a band called GTR. I designed a logo for it. They put out one album, which was extraordinary, and we've met a lot of times since. But the next time after that was at the early Nearfests, and you were there at one of them. And in more recent years, I've done a couple of album covers for Steve, mostly box sets. One of his earliest releases as solo artist, and then the next one was later releases. And we've done a few talks that were being recorded on film. We did a couple on the cruise ships, and Joe suggested we do this one, which seemed a brilliant idea. So please meet Steve Hackett. We're going to be talking about creativity and Asia. Not the band. But...
No, the continent. You don't actually cover the band at all.
Yeah, mostly Japan.
I should also say, for anyone tuning in for Steve who doesn't know who I am, I'm Dad's daughter. So if you're wondering like who it is being like really mean and rude to him, it's fine. It's me. I'm his daughter. So don't worry about it. I do love him and stuff.
I'm glad you explained all that. Yes.
Good for you to hear now and again as well, isn't it?
Yeah, good for me to do. Or something buffed about.
So if you haven't already skipped ahead, I hope you all really enjoy the talk. I did. I thought it was absolutely brilliant and incredibly fascinating, and really nice for me to sort of take a back seat and hear someone else talk to Dad and say very interesting things that I haven't heard before. Love you.
Okay.
Right.
We're now recording.
Fantastic.
Hello.
Right.
Hello, Steve.
Hello.
Hello, Joe.
Yeah, nice to see you. Nice to see you, Roger. How are you?
I'm good. Yes.
Yeah.
And you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Being productive. Recording lots at the moment. It's okay when I'm working. It's when I stop. It's like, what do you do for a social life? So Joe and I talk to each other endlessly, and it's very strange not engaging with friends in the usual sense of the word. But but this is exactly what we're doing. We're having a virtual get together as opposed to normally sitting down over a meal or a drink with other friends. So
Yes.
nice to hook up anyway.
I guess for me, it was an interesting insight into how unsociable I normally am.
Was you just feeling it was very normal? In other words,
Yeah,
not a lot of difference.
not a lot.
Right. Well, I guess that's what artists do, isn't it? Whether it's visual or us sound makers, we of us who make a noise for a living, lots of it is done in private, in secret, lots of isolation, and so in a way, that kind of that inner journey that is part and parcel of what you do every day. Perhaps it isn't that different. You know, you're no stranger to spending masses of time by yourself, or does it not seem like that?
No, it's true. And, you know, my family have said I'm an antisocial person. So,
Yes, yeah.
I,
Well,
I love socializing, but it's not
yes,
a natural way of working.
yes.
So when I'm
Yeah.
working, I'm not normally.
Well, there are those who say that all art is selfishness. So, and I suppose I ought to know my father was an artist, painted paintings and spent massive amounts of time on his own, of course. So I became very used to that whilst I was sequestered away trying to get my hand around those early chords and what have you. So this is it, isn't it? This is what we do. You know, we delve within ourselves, and then eventually we share it with other people. Whereas I suspect other people, certainly when I was young, you know, I have a few drinks with my pals down the pub and all of that, and then it seemed to be less and less case of that. The more seriously, I guess, one gets involved with one's own work, less and less time is spent talking nonsense into the night with pals, which is a thing that I've lost. You know, that off to the pub and get more and more stupid into the night, but more and more bonded and you know, wedded to the people that you were sharing that moment with.
Yeah. I mean, when you're performing, you're with thousands of people. When you're recording, you're with a dozen, maybe half a dozen. But is part of the process, I'm thinking when you write, that must be on your own, isn't it? Or is it?
Well, sometimes it's shared, unlike visual artists who don't share a paintbrush. I imagine most of the time, because you just finish this off for me while I go and make a cup of tea, dear. It doesn't quite work like that. I have worked in larger groups. If you're doing a live album, there are a number of people in the team. There might be anything between 10 and 20 people involved with, you know, a larger production. And if it's the Stones, I'm sure there's 100 people in attendance doing various things. But essentially, I think that writing is something that I either do on my own or I share it with Jo, my wife Jo, or it depends who I'm working with. If I'm working with Roger King, for instance, there'll come a point where I'll run out of ideas on something. I'll say, well, I've taken it thus far, over to you. What do you suggest here? And so that becomes a shared thing, at least between 3 people. And if a soloist comes in and does something, and if they've contributed, like Rob Townsend, for instance, recently, he did something which was so transformative to the piece. I said, well, why don't you and Roger record and do this thing called octatonics that I didn't really understand at first of all until it was explained to me. And there's no separation between the performance and writing. It falls into the category of jazz. Who writes jazz? That's the thing. You know, it's a responsive form. It's instinctive to those who've got the incredible technique to be able to pull it off. And I envy people who can improvise to that degree. I tend to be a bit of a sort of, if I'm improvising, I think of myself as a bit of a blueser, really. And that's when I first heard fluent improvisers going to blues gigs in the mid 1960s. But I know you share an affinity with blues yourself.
I love it.
So,
I've got 3 albums over there which I've been listening to. They're all white blues. I say unfortunately, but I love them. One's the Allman Brothers.
yeah,
really good. Canned Heat.
Can't Heat, yeah. I met those guys. Did a festival with them in Germany a while back. Yeah, and who else was it?
Well, the other one, I don't know if you would call it blues or country, but it's a kind of crossover, and that's Creedence Clearwater.
Ah, yeah. Well, I loved the guy's voice. John Fogerty, is it? And I mean, it's a very full on. It's pure Americana. He always manages to sound like a sort of a woodsman in song, in a way. It's that.
Yes.
Something, or maybe it was just I bought the video. There was some video of him chopping wood, and thought, yeah, right on. That's it. That's what he's doing. He's out there hiking. He's building his own log cabins, catches his own fish. For all I know, he lives in New York and takes cabs everywhere. But it didn't seem like that. You know, it was very much lumberjack shirts and.
Well, the Allman Brothers is a live concert. It's from 1970, could be as early as 71. I'm not sure.
Right.
But a good 15 minutes of it is Mountain Jam, which is what it's
Really?
Yeah, improvised.
Right.
Beautiful, as it happens.
Yes.
Oh my God, sorry about that.
That's all right. Ours will probably go off at some point as well, and it'll be. Sorry, can't talk now, Mum. It's I'm talking to the Prime Minister. Yes, well, you might put him on hold, dear, and we'll.
It's the
yes.
Prime Minister. Sorry, I can't talk now. I'm talking to Mum.
That's right. Isn't that the way at the moment? Yeah, definitely. I tried calling Mum earlier. In fact, she'll probably call back in the middle of all this. Anyway, I know that we were talking about as we have conversations sometimes when we're on Cruise to the Edge, and when we talk about ideas either visual or musical, the idea of the East cropped up, and I remember saying to you I thought that there was quite a bit of influence of the East in your work, because I know you've mentioned it to me quite a lot.
Yes.
You have family connections with the East as well. So,
well, childhood too, because at an incredibly influential age, literally within a few weeks of hearing Elvis, we moved to Hong Kong for a couple of years.
Extraordinary.
So we were living in Hong Kong, 1957, 59, and it was all the early days of rock and roll on American radio. It was amazing.
How old were you then?
I was 12 till 14.
Right.
So it kind of hardwired all my experience of that age, are kind of hardwired, including weirdly English stuff, because we'd spent a lot of years abroad, and my image of England was very much defined by, we were posted there between trips, but Rupert Annuals and the Eagle comic, that was how I got my sense of England. And from it, a strong interest in natural history and a strong interest in designing the future. But what we were visually surrounded by was fabulous Chinese watercolor paintings of mountains, waterfalls, pine trees. That really sunk into my psyche. I later kind of migrated my preference to Japanese woodblock prints, which I ended up really loving.
Right.
But it started with the Chinese watercolors. And although the landscape in Hong Kong was not like that, and I rarely saw an original watercolor, the images were on everything, from screens to fans to dinner mats. They were everywhere. So it was.
I mean, the idea of Hong Kong Harbour and just the shape of the ships and the sails, everything. I mean, I get the feeling that that's been an influence on you.
You thinking of premonitions?
Yes, well, I was thinking of that because that's something that you did for a retrospective of mine. A number of albums, early albums. The first one was originally going to be called Premonitions, but my then record company didn't like it, and then I ended up all these years later, decades later, reinstating the original title, and so it all seemed to fly in tandem somewhat under the very lovely cover that you did for it.
Yeah, I was inspired by the first two titles. The first one you gave me was Voyage of the Acolyte, and the second one was Spectral Mornings. And
yes.
Premonitions came after I kind of committed to the painting. But the kind of flying boat, yes, it has a sail stroke wings that are reminiscent of a junk as well as a dragonfly.
Yes, I guess, sails are really the wings of the sea, what propel craft forward, but somehow there's a romance with that. And I know you mentioned Rupert books, and you're saying that was your connection to London and England, but I can't help noticing the fact that in retrospect, when you look back at Rupert books and their magical effect on us as children, reading it very, very young, I'm sure Rupert probably taught me to read, but you have the idea of this incredibly cosmopolitan society where all races and all times seem to be welcome, whether it's the elves under the wood, the Nutwood Underground, or indeed, is it Tiger Lily, the girl and her magician father, and the whole sort of the visit to the east, which is just a trip down the road into their realm, and all of that I found incredibly magical then, and I think that because it seemed as if it was this little bear, who's a sort of representation of a potential human being, seems to me, has no prejudice. He'll happily sit down with pirates and Chinese conjurers and people from the modern world, which was really the world of the 1920s then, wasn't it, looking at the motor cars? How do you see it, William?
Well, interesting. I see it as a kind of idealization of the English landscape, but it's actually,
yes.
Betzel was living in Wales, and
yes.
Wales was really his inspiration. I love the exotic fantasy of it and the incredible down-to-earth nature of it.
Yes.
So all this weird stuff going on and taken absolutely for granted.
Yes, yeah. And what was the other one? Eagle Comics you mentioned.
Yeah.
Dan Dare and all of that.
Yeah, that was what got me interested in designing the future. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The Mekong, the strange looking green, sort of mischievous, or was he a malevolent presiding kind of was he a cosmic deity, or was he like a Superman villain? Was he Lex Luthor meets Brainiac meets
It was a weird kind of fantasy archetype, wasn't he? He was all brain with little tiny arms and legs.
That's it, yes. He was all brain, that's it, yeah. Yes.
And a floating Vespa.
It's a very strange thing, but I remember when I was seeing King Crimson live for the first time, and seeing Robert Fripp on stage at the time when he was sitting down, who had this huge afro when he was young, and it was watching the band and thinking I am watching this extraordinary extraterrestrial intelligence as far as I'm concerned, and it reminded me in a way of the Megon at one point. You know, it was just, it wasn't moving, and yet everything was going on around it, and it was very unusual. And my love of King Crimson, of course, is very well known, and I think it was a kind of quantum leap in a way in terms of what I prefer to think of now as inclusive music. In other words, jazz, blues, classical, epic, pastoral, all of those elements within this very broad-based, can I use the word canvas that they painted on? Yeah. Because I do.
I particularly like the recent lineup with 3 drums. I thought that was 3 drummers. That was incredibly in your face. Great. I love it.
It's very interesting. I mean, having seen drum schools in South America where you have upwards of 10 drummers all working at once, it's probably quite unusual for the English to see that. Whereas I have encountered hordes of these guys thundering up the avenue in carnival time, and just the sound of that, even if it's not amplified, doesn't need to be, because God, the sound of that is extraordinary. It's terrifying in a way. It's hugely loud, and so in a way, I can see the idea of expanding that, and I love expanded rock, and I think rock shoulder should be able to expand to encompass all these other forms, and any number of people on stage, including an orchestra from time to time, which I've been privileged enough to be able to do, particularly in recent years. I love the enlargement of it, I must admit. You know, little combos can sound great.
Sorry. I was just going to say, talking about Japan again, did it ever cross your mind to try something like a Kodo dojo? You know, the Kodo with all the drummers they do. There was a dojo, i.e. school, for that in San Francisco.
Yeah.
To perform in the Japan Center. And I used to watch them there. I used to think, this is amazing stuff.
Yes. Very, very interesting, all of that, you know, the influence of the East, the 5-note scales, the pentatonic stuff, either in a major or a minor. Years ago, I tried to buy a koto initially in San Francisco, and no one knew what I was talking about in that very same place. Koto, never heard of it. What are you talking about? And I ended up buying one in London, a Cantonese koto, they said this is, and it turns out later that it was possibly a Vietnamese-based thing. But all these descriptions, the Oriental harp, the Chinese harp, the Vietnamese zither, they are all of one family, basically. Something which is shaped not like a harp that you hold like this, but it's on a low table, and you're playing with a fixed chord, so you can't really play a chord that's a bum note that's outside the chord, but it's quite another matter being able to play within that stricture. But it's a beautiful sound. I used it on Spectral, and I bought a new one recently, and I've been using it on some unreleased stuff, and so that takes us off to, you know, virtual journeys of the mind, as I'm sure you do yourself, because your work is entirely of it makes me think of other places, other planets, other places, changed perspectives, places where the gravity is different, or there is no gravity, the floating structures.
I'm painting here and now. Just
what do you do? What are you doing at the moment?
Sorry?
What are you doing at the moment? Is it like that?
In the way of painting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, yes. Whether I'm designing architecture or painting landscapes.
Yeah.
I don't really think I'm doing alien worlds. I think I'm doing reconfigured our world, not in the past and not in the future, but now. How we should be doing it, how we should be treating it.
Yes. Well, you are involved with designing actual places, aren't you?
Yes.
I know you were telling me about that. So,
done a lot more designing than building.
right. Well, but you know, I guess it's a bit like I think yes, I've done a lot more music that's films for the ear rather than music for films. But doesn't mean to say we won't at some point.
No, indeed. We're actually, one of the things we were doing currently, I shouldn't say we are doing right now, is I did a prototype house back in the 90s, and it's been stored on an industrial estate for a couple of decades, and it's in bad need of renovation and care and attention. And we're planning to bring it back to the barn to restore it and renovate it before exhibiting it again. So that was supposed to be happening now, but we've had one or two hiccups. For example, a badger and family have moved into the site we originally had in mind for it. So we've had to rethink where it's going, but that's okay. I'm glad we did, actually, because it's a better place.
Yeah.
And we have a couple of real projects that are struggling through the COVID situation. I think they'll probably survive and it'll happen. But things are happening slower. That's
I know. I mean, it's like live work seems to be a sort of distant dream at the moment. Officially, of course, we get back to doing stuff next year, post-vaccine. But I don't want to join the rest of the horde saying, yes, I'll be back to normal very soon. Meanwhile, the nice thing is, perhaps, as we're both virtually self-employed, the nice thing is that one isn't dependent on having to clock in 9 to 5. I can pick up the guitar any time as your easel. You are the master of your own destiny, so to speak, of the imagination on the canvas. And although I know that at times I suspect, if it's the same as it is for me, sometimes the guitar will be sitting in the corner and it will be challenging me, and it'll be yes, I really ought to be doing that, and I should be making my calluses tougher all the time. And damn it, I will. I'm going to pick it up, but you know, it sits there and challenges me at times, and I think
it's hard to look at it and say, back in your corner, it's gone 5 o'clock. That doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen. No, I mean, and great ideas will come along, or they seem to be really important great ideas during that hour of poetry, just when other people are going to bed, and you think, I've got an idea, I'm going to go get up, either play it or I'm going to write it down. I've got to honor it when the muse alights, when
and you
she dares speaking to me.
And you do?
Yes. I do, yes. I mean, I don't spend all night doing it. I mean, I know that J.S. Bach, the great father of music that was J.S. Bach, tended to work during the night. Now, I don't know how that's possible if you're getting more and more tired, but then I suspect I believe he had so many children that, just like old Mother Hubbard, it was only perhaps when they were all safely tucked up in bed that he'd get the peace and quiet to, you know, bash out some tunes on his harpsichord, perhaps. I don't know. It's, we don't know what pressures people went through then, but I think that if the muse alights during the night, and I know many people who do. I mean, it was Richie Havens said he liked to work at night, so I think he was a night bird, that great singer.
I do the opposite. I love mornings.
Mornings, yeah. Well, for me, that's true. I get most ideas first thing in the morning. If I'm up early, nothing's really kicked in yet. No commitments. Yes, just before the phone calls start and the what's-its and and things that have to be posted and all of that. It can be very precious, that time first thing in the morning.
Yeah,
It can
it's
be still half a foot in dreamland, and the other part that's ready in harness, ready to go to it. And I don't mind that at all. I find it innovating first thing in the morning. So I'm probably at my best. I won't be hidebound by logic that'll kick in very shortly, but I'll maybe dream up an idea. I'll be thinking, oh, where did that come from? What was that? I don't really understand that. I don't really understand the creative process at all, really. Where does a painting come from, Roger? How do you imagine something? How do you plug in? What do you do?
well, I think I don't think it's a terrible mystery. I think if you're thinking and you're plotting and planning and analyzing, there's not enough space for ideas. When you're
Right.
dreaming, when you're not plotting and planning, if you're quiet and just letting the ideas flow through your head, then they come.
Yes. Yeah.
And, the challenge is not so much do the ideas come, but catching them and, as it were, pinning them down, getting
Yes.
the world. So yeah,
Yeah.
I find that when we were at art school, I remember being taught a systematic analysis as the proper way to design something. You lay out all your facts and you analyze everything. And I thought that this is the death of ideas.
Yes.
You get,
Yeah.
they want you to get, but you miss all the other wonderful possibilities.
Yeah.
So I would do that, and then I would ignore it because it was not a productive way of thinking.
Yeah.
It was the sort of thing you would do after you've come up with the idea, maybe, but
Yeah.
not before.
Yeah.
I mean, writers talk about not editing while you're writing
Yes.
because the two processes fight each other. Creativity
Yes.
and editing, one destroys the other. And
Yes.
I find that when I'm painting and if I'm listening to a story or something like that, I'm not focusing on the painting and a lot more ideas flow out. You've got it there in your brain. The brain is doing all the great stuff. You just have to
Yes.
in peace to get on with it.
Yes. Well, I certainly find that travel informs the work, and lucky to have spent quite a bit of time in the East, visiting Japan and China and even India and other places in recent years, because my wife Jo was already very much a world traveler. I mainly visited Europe, the touring map for rock and roll, Europe, America, the Americas, all of that, and latterly Australia and New Zealand. So much traveled, particularly in recent years, to other places that would have informed the music and continue to do so, particularly the Oriental stuff. And visiting Kyoto, for instance, and seeing a number of those very small places, the temples. And I remember Julian Colbeck, keyboard player, saying to me, there's not that much of it, it's all actually quite small and a little bit like Disneyland, really. But then visiting with Jo, my wife, we went to the Fushimi Inari shrine, which is on the edge of Kyoto, and that's a whole mountain where you have a gateway of pillars, thousands of vermilion gates. So it's like a pilgrimage as you go up this thing, which is lined with foxes. They have this idea of foxes being a kind of conduit between heaven and earth. Shinto shrine. As you go up through these vermilion gates, as they call it, they're all pillars. They go on for ages and ages, and it takes about 2 hours to climb to the very top and then down the other side. But you do feel transformed by it, because I remember Jo had a foot injury, and I was very worried that she wouldn't make it down the other side, having ascended it. I was very worried about that. But she said, actually, I feel so up and transformed and uplifted with this. I'm not feeling the problem coming down. So luckily, something kicked in. Would it be the noradrenalines or the inspiration? And so much inspiring stuff from Japan. I know you were talking about the deer that visit that temple that you
in Nara. Yes. It's amazing, because they come off the mountain in the morning, and they're bullying tourists to make them give them biscuits.
Yeah, that's fantastic, isn't it? It's wonderful.
Amazing. Yes.
And there are other things that Japan have to offer. If I was on the Japanese tourist board here, I'd be singing the same praises of the same places, like Kamakura, where they have the giant Buddha, which you can climb inside, and it's absolutely lovely. A Buddhist temple. There's a garden on a hillside beside the sea that is a shrine to children who've died young. But there's this extraordinary peace about the place, and there's a cave there, and it's absolutely lovely. So there's so much.
They have a fabulously developed aesthetic sensibility, don't they?
Yes, yeah, it's beautiful, absolutely lovely. So I love that, and I love what I've read of Oriental poetry. It's so restful, and seems to be minimalism, perhaps before the word was invented. The idea of just the 2-line stanzas of haiku, and maybe just a brush stroke or two of something, and it's absolutely lovely. The idea of the journey implied with so little, but isn't that lovely? It doesn't take you very long to absorb that in the midst of a busy world. And
I've spoken to architects and think of their architecture, or a lot of modern architecture, being inspired by the simplicity and minimalism of Japanese architecture, but it's profoundly different. Japanese architecture embodies something called wabi-sabi, which is the beauty of decay. I'm probably not translating it right, but it's that idea that something, when it's brand new, is not at its peak of perfection.
Right.
As the wood turns silvery and the grain is raised up, as it ages, as lichen grows over it, then it reaches a peak of beauty. But even that is transient, it moves on. And you don't get that opportunity to grow when you have concrete and steel and glass. It's sterile. And so you have the simplicity that is full of life and texture and narrative. You can't compare that to something that is so bland and so sterile.
Yes.
It's just worlds apart. So, yes. I love the aesthetic of it. I also love the incredible gentleness of the fantasies of Miyazaki. I remember you and Jo watched his animations, didn't you?
That's right. Yes.
Neighbor Totoro. I just love that film.
Yes, beautiful stuff. Extraordinary. Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to say, I discovered him when Freya was watching Disney Hour.
Your daughter?
Yes. And I thought, my God, this stuff is dreadful. And at about the same time, I started to discover Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki.
Yes.
The perfect.
Yeah, there's that wonderful one called Spirited Away, which is the most strange, and it's a sort of depiction of a kind of ghostly fairground, and you never know what's going to happen. You don't know if the characters are good or
No,
bad or what. Sorry.
no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
It's
and in a way, it's a bit like a child, where you don't know if you know your precepts are not fully formed, and so you don't really know. You're trying to assess: is this friend or foe, good teacher, bad teacher, all of those things, and the characters in that. You don't know if they're helpers or hinderers, demons, angels, or what. And but it's very, very inventive, isn't it?
it's fabulously dreamlike.
Yes. I mean, you introduced us to that, and I gather it's a bit like the Japanese Disney, isn't it? That's if
Oh,
there's a if
no,
there's
no,
a
it's unkind. Much better than Disney.
much better than well, I'm you know. I'm trying to think of something else. Yes, as Coca-Cola is to drinks, so Ghibli is to champagne. Yeah, it's rich in ideas. It's bubbling over with ideas, and I gather there came a point where he retired, and I gather that was quite a big deal.
Yeah, sad. Yeah. He retired, but he came back and made a couple more films. I think. Sorry, excuse me, dropping something and picking it up. I first came across Japanese films from almost the opposite, the sort of very violent samurai movies. But some of them have that gentleness at their heart as well. There's a lovely one I saw called After the Rain, which is beautifully tranquil samurai movie.
Yes.
And actually, I was thinking I should give you a list of a couple, because it's a tradition there to finish the film or have the theme of the film to be drumming.
Yes.
So the musical theme is drumming. And there's a Satucci, there's 70 Satucci movies or 80. They're almost endless. But one of them, I was very impressed with it, because that drumming theme is picked up. There's a rainstorm, and there's characters passing through the paddy fields. And in the foreground, there's farmers working the paddy field. And they've got the drumming theme going with the tools that they're using in the field. And later on, the film is picked up again by carpenters rebuilding the village. And it's a constant thing. It's not just done, as it were, by musicians, but it's done by everybody, is reinforcing that theme. And there's a number of movies that have a very wonderful drum element to it, especially at the end, where folk drumming is a big deal, part of it.
Am I right in thinking the film Onibaba, The Whole, had that? I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it was out in the 1960s, and a black and white film, but it had those sort of devil masks. It's a very strange story that I probably shouldn't talk about in case anyone decides to see that. But I seem to remember that it was very, very stark on just about every level, and I do remember drumming in it, and it may well be that may have been the entire score. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but it's a rather extraordinary story. It's
mother and daughter.
Mother and daughter. That's right. Yes.
Trapping samurai.
That's right. Trapping samurai warriors, aren't they? And
yes.
And
they're taking the armor and selling it.
That's right. Taking the armor and selling it. See, you're aware of the film. It's extraordinary. Sorry?
They often had very violent stories, but incredibly beautifully filmed.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
That was a very spooky movie.
Yeah, very. Yes.
Yeah.
And Kurosawa's stuff as well, which seems almost like I remember seeing, I think it was a series of short films that where the camera didn't move at all. It's almost like Peter Greenaway, where it's a tableau, but everything's happening within it. And at one point, it's the scene is covered with petals, and I guess they must have used a wind machine at some point, and suddenly they all go off, and it's the most incredible thing as the color starts to move. And so the idea of the fixed frame still transports you, because what's happening inside it is compelling, and it was a very radical way of working.
My brother to the samurai movies. He used to run the Central College of Art Society, Film Society, and he used to ring up and say, "We've got a good one tonight," and I go over, and it would be, you know, we would see Hidden Fortress, Kurosawa, and
Right.
Jimbo, and I was thinking, great stories, but so beautifully filmed, and so beautifully filmed. They were elegant.
Yeah. So I think what, in conclusion, perhaps, I would say we were big fans of the East in different ways, whether it's the poetry, the music, the
philosophy, I guess, too. I mean,
philosophy, all of that, and although we don't perhaps speak the language, or perhaps you do, nonetheless, there's an affinity, because I think Japanese audiences in particular seem to have this fascination with detail. So they seem to understand what motivates the craftsman to imbue his work with detail and love.
Yes.
As we attempt to.
Yes. Yes, I'm a big fan. Well, sadly, my daughter is a big fan too, to the extent she's moved out there, and she's been living in Japan for 4 years now.
Yes. Well.
And when
so she has lost her heart to Japan, it seems.
I she loves
for a while.
The aesthetics of it. She loves the politics, maybe less so, but the aesthetics,
right?
Fabulous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when it comes to speaking the language, I picked up this amount of Japanese from doing kendo. She did one day tell me, she said, "Dad, don't try it out in Japan. They won't know what you're talking about."
Just beat them over the head with a stick. My equivalent is flatten them with volume. Actually, of course, involved with acoustic music, as one does every few albums or so, there's no tyranny of volume. So you've got to, it's just the relationship that you have with the instrument yourself. And if you love it, you hope that Segovia's dictum holds true, which is that the artist so loves his own work that he compels others to love it also.
Yes.
Or else. Well, there you go. I guess we ought to wind up, really, because I know we're both off to doing busy days work, and I'm about to make a noise again for a living, which I do in about 15 minutes when the other Roger in my life turns up, and that's Roger King. So,
well, say hello, and
I will.
And
ask hello. And here's Jojo, who's just looking at me, who ought to say hello to everyone. If not, hello and goodbye from my very lovely Jojo. There she is. There she is. There we are.
Hi.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Fascinating chat.
Yeah,
really enjoyed
it's always good.
it. Brilliant.
Yeah.
You guys are fantastic.
It's always great to hook up.
Yes. We'll catch up soon.
We will. Okay. Love to all.
Love to all.
And to everyone, all the folks at home.
Thanks, Joe, for arranging this.
Oh, thank you for arranging this.
Indeed.
Thank you.
That's
it's
right.
great.
Okay. So I end it because I'm the host. So
okay.
See you soon, both of you.
Oh, great. Absolutely. Absolutely. Let us know when you've got it all together, and then we'll all figure out how to put out the link and everything.
Indeed. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, be good.
All the best, mate.
Good to chat soon.
Ciao.
You take care.